Welcome back everyone dito sa latest episode ng itong FYI series natin. 2026 starting strong. Ito na bulol tayo. So sobrang dami nangyayari 2026. Just before this, pinag-usapan kung ma-abduct rin si Bato. Just sa nangyari. Kasi bring home Maduro na yung nakikita kong bring him home. Meron ng version na ganun. Dahil ba ito sa Brooklyn, lahat ng mga superstars dinala doon sa OG. Now, speaking of 2026, thank you very much, Dean, and of course, Men of the Hour. I think Surfer Boy. Galing talaga.
Dean of Surfing.
I know. Akala ko na-chamba ka rin.
Pwede.
In fairness, looking lean, looking amazing. Okay, let's talk about it. 2026, do we think, first I'll start with you kasi you guys have the numbers or to the same degree. Mamaya, pag-usapan natin ng Mindanao, Gen Z, Lineal, whatever. But unang-una, what do the numbers tell us in terms of the lay of the land as we get nearer and nearer to the 2028? I think the lesson for everyone from 2022 is it's all about war of position and coalition building. Once nagsama Marcos Duterte, I think that the race was basically over, and that 11th hour inspiring pink flush and all of that eventually did not sustain the way it should have based on the eventual outcome. So here we are, 2026. Sara Duterte is still holding on to a significant plurality of voters. That's why I don't buy yung argument na, hindi, pero sa mga data election, si ganito. Yeah, but the Philippines is not the same after Rodrigo Rua Duterte. Whether it's the flood control project, whether it's the EJK, whether it's the impunity. I think people don't realize inflection point si Rodrigo Duterte in 2016. This is not the same political system anymore. Whatever mutation it has been experiencing over the past few years, no? What did the number tell us in terms of the lay of the land? How strong is still the Duterte movement? And what is the implication for other forces who are scrambling to put something together in preparation for the showdown?
Right. Richard, I think to start with, sana bagong taon, we start parang less complaining about the surveys and more about facing the reality. Nung natapos yung 2025, naglabas yung WR numero ng survey on the lay of the preferences ng ating mga kababayan for the 2028 potential na election, right? I think there are three things to learn from that. One is that outside Mindanao, that means Metro Manila, Luzon, and Visayas, so nandyan yung 75% of the voters. Kalahati ng populasyon ay mga independents, swayable, middle forces, right? Wala silang sobrang strong preferences pa. Kaya in those areas, in the 75% in those areas, iba't ibang mga kampo, pro-Marcos, pro-opposition, pro-Duterte, may competitive na battlefield, right? But in Mindanao, solid, clear, na up to 80% of Mindanaoans are saying that they want Sara Duterte as their president come 2028. And paano siya nag-translate in numbers? Kasi yung Mindanao is 25%, almost 25% of the national voting population. You get 80 of that, you have around 20.
Yeah.
Diba?
That's 1/5 of total.
So papasok ka ngayon sa national race,
meron ka na agad,
may 20 ka na.
May baong ka na.
Kaya they always ask sa mga surveys, imposible naman na 30% si Sara, imposible naman na 30. Actually, no. If you pay attention to the numbers, yung starting point niya ng 20, ibig sabihin, maliit lang yung kailangan niyang kunin from Visayas, Luzon, Metro Manila. Visayas may Cebu na di ba? Because of the imagined...
The governor now also,
di ba?
Duterte supporter.
So they get to that number, di ba? So
which is what was not there in other races before the whole Duterte phenomenon, right? This solid South thing is a new phenomenon that has completely changed the landscape. So ang laki ng cushion mo meron kang 15 to 20% crystallized support base, which I don't think any candidate could have boasted, especially candidates coming from the south of the country back in the day.
Lugi yung or parang in a different position yung mga ibang kandidato kasi yung baluarte nila is not as solid, diba? Parang Luzon, it's not going for the same just one person, diba? Luzon is pagka taga-norte ka, you look for the Marcos candidate, right? Sino bang i-endorse ng Marcos? Kapag South Luzon, Bicol area, of course,
Lenny,
opposition, Lenny, diba? Visayas, broadly, yung outside Cebu, lalo na yung Western Visayas, diba? That's going to be the opposition, your opposition voters. So, medyo disperse So, I think those are the three things that alam nating lay of the land entering the 2026. Sara has a good hold on Mindanao. That's 25%. That conservative
Grip
na
almost.
estimate
Hindi
na,
siya
diba?
all the grip. Yeah.
The rest of the country are dispersed. Either nag-iisip pa yung 50%, the 50% hati-hati naman sa mga ibang kandidato. And then the last thing that means that anyone who would like to see Sara Duterte presidency not happen in 2028, ibig sabihin, kailangan yung mag-usap-usap dito dun sa dispersion.
But this will also apply if it's Bongo, right? To a certain degree. Because, I mean, Bongo and Bato were almost number 1 and 2. I mean, Bato was right behind Bam Aquino dito sa 2025. So we saw the solid South effect still there, di ba? Although, of course, Senate race is different from presidency. But you can see the resilience, nung grittiness nung solid South na yan. If it were Bato, let's say for some reason, Sara doesn't run talaga for presidency, right? Whether legal, political, or personal reasons, right? Will Bongo also be as competitive? Any top contender from that camp?
Senator Bongo is also competitive, lalo na kung ang basis ay yung 2025 na midterm elections.
Right.
So there are only 2 Senate candidates na nakatawid across different camps, and that means across different areas in the Philippines. That's Senator Bongo and Senator Bam Aquino. So silang dalawa, meron silang sizable na boto across the Philippines. And that's unique sila kasi kahit sa baluarte ng kalaban, enough yung boto nila. So, si Bongo, pag tumingin ka sa Bicol, Lenny Country,
may
vote, diba?
pa rin siya everywhere.
Bam, tingin ka sa Mindanao, nakakapasok pa din siya. So, nakakatawid silang dalawa. So, more or less, parang sila yung mga second na competitive din yung numbers outside Sara, for example.
Right? It's not only, so we're really talking about the house of Duterte, the Duterte base, right? It's not just Sara Duterte per se, no? Ikaw, Dean Ed, before I go to Dean. Dean Ed, sorry. Dean Ed, ikaw, what is your think of this? I mean, this whole solid South thing, the lay of the land. Before we go to BBM and Gen Z and the broader discussion.
I think yung discussion na binabanggit kanina ni Cleve is not really only limited to one survey alone. We've seen the SWS survey as well, and it's indicative of that somehow, maybe at least for the perspective of some depressing realization that it's really, it should really para bang trigger some alarm bells for those who don't want a Sara Duterte presidency in 2028. But I think, we've heard the arguments several times over. The opposition has to unite, the Pinks has to come up with even just a tactical or a strategic, even better a strategic coalition with the Marcoses and what have you, no? And I think the minute we start accepting these numbers as indicative of the direction of politics, the better it is for us to prepare for 2028. So in other words, let's not be Pollyannish about it kasi yun na yun eh. Yun na yun. And if you don't accept it for what it is, then you're going to, you won't be able to make the appropriate preparation in the run-up to the presidential elections come 2028.
Then, Guy, are you worried there's still denialism or complacency or something in between on the part of the non-Duterte or anti-Duterte forces?
Well, definitely we really have to accept the fact that as we open this new year, there are really clear wrongdoings of what happened in this administration, and to some extent it also helped and bolstered the claim of VP Sara that tingnan yung ginagawa ng administration to, puro palpak, kaya mukhang kahit wala siyang ginagawang tama, nagiging tama yung ginagawa niya. So ayun yung tanggapin na natin, no? That's why to some extent malaki rin talaga yung magiging pagkukulang ng the present administration if this administration will continue to underperform and fail to deliver its promises. Paano ang dami mga pinangako ng administration ito especially bago matapos yung taon. Pero ngayon, it seems na hindi na ito deliver very clearly sa mga taong to. Kaya to some extent, medyo natutulungan nila yung sinasabi ni VP Sara. So, tanggapin dapat yun ay maging maliwanag sa mga taong naghahanap ng isang alternative for 2028. Kung tingin natin ay hindi ready ang mga Pilipino sa administrasyon uli ng mga Duterte, I think it's very important that people should come up with and confront head on itong realidad na ito. Kasi pag nagde-delay tayo, tingin natin na beatable pa rin yan, etc. We are doing disservice to this country. So once and for all, I think 2026 will be a crucial year for those who call for a stronger democratic opposition, for strengthening accountability and ending the impunity, na importante magsama-sama and at the same time, harapin at once and for all, sino ba talaga ang Panama natin? No? Kasi sa totoo lang, si BP Sara lang ng pinaka-prominent na nagsasabi na tatakbo siya for 2028 eh. Kaya people will realize it and people will remember it. Pero sa ngayon, sino ba talaga pwedeng lumaban sa kanya? At yun ang hinahanap natin.
So before we go to the potential other candidates and all, balikan natin si BBM, no? Kasi if you look at the administration, objectively speaking, I mean, in fairness, at least there is an admission that something is wrong, which was not the case before under Rodrigo Duterte, when talaga nagsimula per PCIJ, among others, lahat ng mga Ligaya, Diskaya, ghost projects, among other things, right? Pangalawa, the ICI obviously was not as ideal as we thought, but at least it opened up some room, some space for proper investigation. And if you look at the budget, I mean, in fairness naman to the budget, there was more transparency in the budget. The president reduced a lot of inappropriate funds to reduce the room for mumbo jumbos. So, in fairness to that, if you talk to the people in admin, they're saying, why are the numbers showing this? So, are we being punished for recognizing there's a problem and at least doing something about it, no matter how imperfect? Hindi ba unfair yan? I mean, Clive, how do you see? Like, is this a perception war, or you think to begin with, the way the president opened up this floodgate, rather, of flood control project, because I think the running consensus is it was not coordinated. Kasi kung systematic ang problema, systematic din ang approach. Hindi pwede yung spontaneous ka sa systematic problem. And to what degree does it also explain the resilience or grittiness of the Duterte base? If anything, Sara's numbers in some surveys even went up. Not as high as the Gong era, 90%-ish. But Sara is clearly also benefiting from this. There's still some sort of a juxtaposition, binary dimension to it. Before we talk about third force, ibang usapan niya later on.
Yeah. Well, I think the president started well, di ba? Kahit naman sa survey ng WR numero, may konting bump yung kanyang numbers nung right after the SONA na mahiya kayo. But the problem is, honesty and transparency and disclosure, that's only a virtue to a certain extent. Kasi after some time, pinasilip niya yung bahay niya, madumi, maraming magnanakaw, and then tapos ano? So, actually, yung momentum was on the president's side, and you can't really blame, di mo talaga ma-blame yung ating mga kababayan nung bigla na lang silang umatras na at sinabi, I can no longer support the administration because the president asked for national attention, he asked for our eyes. Sabi niya, tignan niyo ako, I'm gonna do something, I'm gonna resolve this big issue.
It was given to him.
Binigyan natin siya ng opportunity, pero hindi masyadong, hindi nag-perform eh. Di ba?
Yeah, underperform yung term na ginamit ko kanina.
Underperform.
I think ang obvious dyan, Richard, is that, di ba lagi natin sinasabi, we have to start with the end in mind. Mukhang it's a badly written script na okay, merong climax agad in the beginning and then walang follow through. And there are a lot of examples that we can cite to support this kind of observation. Like, there was a self-imposed deadline about arresting.
Yun, yung mga yan. That statement's very somehow problematic.
Ano ng petsa na ngayon? Tapos na tayong magbatian ng Happy New Year.
Minupulit, di ba? Parang January 11
baka ibang
daw.
Christmas ang inisip. Kasi sa ibang religion, January pa lang Christmas, di ba?
But think of it, nobody asked for a deadline. It's a self-imposed thing.
Right.
And since you made that kind of deadline for yourself, kahiyaan na, pukpukan na kung anong pukpukan, tuloy mo na yun. Make it happen. Kasi otherwise, lalong magdidwindle in support. And I think if the survey means anything, that is what we're seeing now.
Which means also, Richard, na yung mga reforms, for example, that this administration initiated, to some extent, give it to them. Halimbawa, yung transparency, yung sa budget, yung sa BICAM. Medyo na-overshadow nga ng also their own statement. Because the fact that they promise and they fail to deliver, definitely, malaki yung problema.
Which I think is something that I lament from a governance perspective. Kasi it's not naman fair to say that the administration is not doing anything positive, no? Even just the budget. Now, we've received a lot of criticisms. We've heard a lot of criticisms sa budget na yan na merong mga soft pork, etc., etc. We're not saying it's perfect, but we're also not looking at the positive features of the budget, like the level of transparency that they now observed in the deliberation, the kind of allocation that you did insofar as certain sectors are concerned. Hindi na pag-usapan yun. It's just really a question of, kukurapin na naman yan, etc., etc. So it's really so kinda nadadrown dun sa issue eh.
But isn't the problem sana may clear juxtaposition? Ito yung kalakaran dati. I mean, we used to criticize
Sure.
Pinoy
Yeah,
for always
sure,
bringing
yeah.
it back to Arroyo. But actually, in a way, BBM should have done that now, di ba? For all criticism you have, we went from -10 to 5 out of 10.
True,
That's like
true,
15 points
true,
jump, di ba?
True.
Parang walang ganun eh.
I-
Wala akong nakikitang ganun eh.
And at the core of it, I think, Richard, is communication eh. It's the same problem with the ICI.
Yes,
Diba?
yeah.
I mean, isa pa yan, Kwan. It's a diagnostic tool that you can sort of use to somehow give get an idea of what's happening. Like, walang proper administrative support, yung mga ganun, and then communication lines, what's happening inside, and then belatedly, naisip nila, we have to get the public involved, and then they didn't know how to ask proper questions, etc. So, communication's importante.
Again, nag-resign na yung wala lang quorum ang ICA kasi sila lang natira, tsaka executive director.
One-man
so-
team.
Kaya
Well,
nga.
I mean, all we need is love, di ba? Sabi ni yan.
So it's yung just following the statement kanina ni Dean Gary, no? It's not safe to say, it's not fair to say that the administration has not been doing anything positive. As a matter of fact,
Yeah.
it has. Except that it's getting drowned into the negatives dahil nga dun sa mga problema pinag-usapan natin kanina.
Then can we go back to this? I mean, from your understanding, let's do longitudinal, right? I think Pinoy was very clear throughout his term. This is going to be different from Arroyo. In many ways, it may explain ba't ang delayed yung mga infra projects, ang dami lang clean up ginagawa. They were making sure na walang kalokohan na mangyayari katulad ng mga nangyari sa mga dating administrasyon. I didn't see the juxtaposition. I mean, weirdly, ICI had Sandro there, but not Polong there, not Bongo there, not the other people who were accused of. Like, it was very weird. It's like, hindi lang siya on the defensive. It was like self-inflicted all the time, diba? And the more, even if, I mean, no matter what happens, it's never enough. Because then people say, what about the Marcos legacy? What about Marcos? Like, it was always like there's something parang lacking and like, hindi siya comprehensive, or in a way, it was set up for, not naman seppuku, parang it was more self-inflicted harm, even though it looks like the intention was good. But having said that, there were huge positive reforms, including in the Congress, compared to what was there before. Again, we're not Scandinavia, but coming from the Duterte era. Can you remind us what we're talking about in terms of...
Well, even yung ICA, sabi nga natin nung una when it was created, to some extent we supported it because, to some extent, ombudsman will not be enough kasi nga very huge ito and we need to have a dedicated body or office that will try to investigate, especially at this juncture na grabe nga yung issue ng flood control. Unfortunately, yun nga pinatawag mo yung mga tao na dapat ay well, they're supposed to be there, but yung iba pang mga what you call this, yung other antagonists or protagonists. Yan nga, sila Pulong Duterte, sila Bongo, or sino man na pwede pang ma-involve, na pwede pang ma-unpack, na parang all of a sudden, or just let them scot-free. So, nawawala nung, nade-delegitimize. Ayun ang naging problema ng ICI. No? Sayang yung ganong opportunity. At halimbawa nga, meron panawagan yung other civil society organizations and even yung mga lawmakers like sila Chal Jokno, si Daya Diliman, na baka pwedeng meron ng batas, make
it more permanent.
Make it really, an agency na merong merong teeth, to some extent, and some budget na hindi lang sa ICI na delay yung budget kaya nag-alisan din yung mga tao. So ang dami opportunity. So katulad ng sinasabi ko kanina, again, we are not discrediting yung mga efforts and reforms that this administration instituted and initiated. Unfortunately, now overdrawn or now overshadow nga because
overpromise and overpromise
and underdeliver kasi nga nasaan na yung mga sila mismo kasi kung di natin maigay, di ba, sa governance ka, sa public policy, yung demand ng mga tao, definitely, they even, to be fair, this administration, nilagpasan pa nila yung gusto nilang mangyari. Unfortunately, hanggang doon sa pangakong yun, hindi rin na-deliver talaga yung dapat i-deliver. Yung mga dapat na panagutin na sila mismo nag-impose ng mga deadline na yan, at sabi nila, hindi masaya yung mga Pasko, mukhang masaya yung Pasko ng mga taong
Humingi nga ng forlaw yung ibang involved.
So, isa pa yun.
That means they didn't feel enough fear, right? Like, why would they even dare to ask for a
So the
break?
people are thinking, baka
Christmas
meron ba
break.
mga modus vivendi na
May mga
nangyayari?
negosasyon.
Ayun nga eh.
Yun yung
So
problema.
parang, I think ang question kasi ay, parang there's a habit na yung administration, parang it asks other people to fight its own battles.
Yun nga.
Parang medyo weird na
Sinimulan nila.
mas mainit pa yung laban from the bottom, and then we don't feel enough enthusiasm from the top, from Malacanang, di ba? I think hindi lang naman siya dun sa anti-corruption effort nila, because they could have mobilized the entire power of Malacanang, mga aresto,
She's still significant, right?
at matutuwa yung taong bayan, di ba?
Yeah.
But also kasi parang pattern, di ba? With the ICC arrest of Digong, with the arrest of Kibuloy.
Pero
diba?
baka may kinalaman
Parang-
doon. Maybe after the ICC arrest of President Duterte, which for me
Nagdadalawang isip
was
na.
still the biggest event of 2025.
Yeah,
definitely.
Which is gonna have repercussions for years, if not decades to come. I think the admin, you could see they folded in. Because after that, exactly, everyone was saying, once you go for gold, go for broke na eh, di ba?
Yeah, true.
So after that, he should have said, nilagay namin dyan kasi tignan mo, pinatay si Kian, But you just immediately the instinct of the president was like, ganon, nag-fold into. In fact, literally, that's what someone described to me, who met the president right after. He folded into himself. Parang ganon yung term na ginamit. Na parang biglang, wait, parang did I punch too far? Parang ganon. Biglang may nasuntok ka na muntik na knockout. Nako. So, I think there was kind of a almost PTSD after yung reaction sa Mindanao among others. Dapat ako ngayon na PTSD, ako ngayon na persona non grata, hindi nga si BBM, di ba?
Which is a disappointment kasi the story after is as important as the arrest itself.
Yeah. Even more
Pero wala
important
naman
because it
sinabi yung
shapes the
presidente.
past. Right, exactly.
So then, kaya until now, ang question ay, there's a clear story coming from the Duterte side, di ba? Yung volume ng kanilang kwento, narratives, they've invested a lot of that. Yan lang yung sinasabi
Saturation
nila. But what is the
strategy.
administration side?
Response.
The administration side is that we were asked by the Interpol, it's our obligation, and that's it, right?
Yeah.
Pero bakit hindi pa hinome run, di ba?
No, there's a perfect Tagalog term for that. It's malagihay.
Ano yung malagay?
Malagihay. It's alanganin eh. It's neither here nor there. So, since you initiated the process,
Malagihay.
tuloy-tuloy
Makes sense.
mo na yan.
na.
Diba?
Ambivalent siya, parang ganun.
Go for
Neither
gold
here
na
nor
eh.
there.
Go for the-
Yun nga, that's the worst you could have done.
Yeah,
that's right eh.
Lagay mo yung pinaka-head patriarch nila in detention potential for the rest of his life. And then after that, biglang,
Dalawang isip
sorry
ka.
technicalities lang yan. I mean, that's why hindi ko maintindihan yun eh. Like,
Even the argument na, well, we're not really under the, the
ICC
Rome
jurisdiction,
Statute,
yeah,
etc., etc. They should have abandoned that rhetoric from the beginning. Nandyan na eh. Panindigan mo na. Give it all your legal argument in favor of it so that the messaging is not here and there and it's not watered down or lukewarm. Anyway, nandyan na yan. It won't happen without your direction. Alam naman natin yun. And so, what's the point of somehow backtracking and then softening your position on the matter? So, hindi maganda yung message na wala kang resolve. Sana hindi mo na lang yung ginawa in the first place. Di ba? Ganon. That is, I think, yung epekto nun.
yeah, I mean, nakita natin sa lawag, di ba? Earlier, last year, sa February, meron siya yung medyo bardagulan speech sa president. Yung mga kandidato ko, hindi katulad ng kandidato.
Yes.
Pero biglang, maalala mo, actually, rin sila ni Digong. But anyway, putting those unfortunate details aside, meron tayong may mga spasms and flashes of passion and brilliance.
Pero PTSD din
follow
kasi
through
PTSD din kasi ni Bongbong yung midterm elections niya eh.
Na-double PTSD siya. Let's just put it that way. Yung underperformance sa Senate race, bad underperformance, and then yung backlash sa Mindanao and parts of the country dun sa ICC decision niya. I mean, to be honest, isn't it interesting? Another polling agency came up with a survey that even put Digong there, approval rating of Digong. And then I made a joke, bakit lagay nyo rin si Teves, lagay nyo rin si Kibola. But anyway, and that showed Digong was still very popular, more popular than both Sara and BBM. So, if you're a president and you look at that, naku po, grabe. Parang survival mode na lang ako. So I think he really folded himself and went into defensive mode and then nag-double PTSD siya. And yet, interestingly, the president was decisive when he wanted Martin Romualdez, his de facto most important ally, to step down. Suddenly doon, decisive na siya. Hindi na pwede ma-continue yung status quo, ganun. Bigla naging decisive siya, pinatanggal niya si Bersamin, isa sa mga closest cabinet member niya. So, we see this asymmetry of decisiveness whereby yung mga people, parang, if you're farther than me, hindi siya Machiavellian yung keep your enemies closer. It's more like punch your friends more, reconciliatory sa pero like, medyo weird.
Pero Richard, yun nga yung sinasabi natin yung decisiveness, medyo Johnny come lately. And aside from Johnny come lately, yung decisiveness,
Selective.
Ako lang, ano ba yung end game? Kasi parang, sige, tanggalin natin lahat, all of a sudden, even yung closest allies mo na pwedeng sumuporta sa'yo, na pwedeng kang ipagtanggol, all of a sudden, you simply miss them. So wala na. Parang, okay, bahala na. So, hindi niya nakikita na meron tong reflection. Itong mga taong to nakatrabaho niya for the longest time, to some extent, di ba, natumaya sa kanya, and then all of a sudden, ang nagiging tingin ng mga tao yun, nilaglag mo ng walang dahil, nang hindi maayos ang end game. So parang, are you trying to save yourself? And at the same time, hindi mo alam na it goes back to you. No? Parang nagsisiling din yun ka.
Secondary effect yan.
Yung kata na siling din yun, it coming back to you.
May boomerang effect.
Yun ang nangyayari. Kasi yun ang nagiging tingin ng mga ordinaryong mga kababayan natin.
And you had all those vultures waiting for this admin to make a mistake. I don't understand. This was not in a neutral field. It was in the battle of parang sa gitna ng gyera, biglang tinanggal mo yung general mo, tinanggal mo yung ganun.
Okay pa sana if you're firing on all cylinders
Yun pa, oo.
Okay na, I mean sa akin, that would even be more acceptable. But the point is, you just do a simple comparison. Parang mas maraming tinamaan dun sa mga
aliado niya.
Kaya nga baka nga kasi it also, baka it reveals sino ba yung audience ni BBM in mind.
Kasi
bakit yun nga, kagaya ng sinabi natin.
Community.
Okay, understandably, baka hindi niya na kayang pangatawanan, tinanggal niya si Speaker Martin, pero wala siyang pinitas sa kabila. Pwede naman na parehas na kasi ang posisyon naman is lahat dapat, di ba?
I mean,
so pwede din naman on the other side. Pagsabayin mo na, di ba? So you respond to the public demand, but at the same time, hindi mo din winiwikan yung sarili mong administration politically, right? If you sacrifice one, you get from the other as well. So equal kayo. Pero
the calculus would add
up, di ba? Pero baka iba yung audience niya kasi mukhang
So what is our suspicion? What is he playing to? International audience, media? What is he trying to impress?
My suspicion even is that he has this idea that he can still court the Duterte voters and win them back. But my opinion is that
that ship has sailed.
Possible, di ba? Pero kasi masyado siyang sensitive.
So, may ginawa yung study sa WR.
Kasi masyado siyang sensitive on the Duterte constituency pagka tinanong mo yung mga tao sa survey within nung November 2025, sino para sa iyo yung pinakapangunahing responsable sa flood control projects? Si Martin, magtatop siya sa pro-DDS camp. Magtatop siya sa Mindanao, right? So, tapos iba-iba yung magtatop sa ibang lugar, Luzon, Metro Manila, Vizcaya, contractors, right? So the fact na ito yung pinili mo, di ba? Parang you're listening to a very specific segment of the population. And it's
appeasement strategy.
Yes,
is that what
it's
they're calling
a
appeasement strategy?
Nag-work ba? Parang, I'm not sure if it's working.
No, we're sure it's not working. His numbers are horrible.
Public numbers siya.
Okay, let's remind him. What are BBM's number in all the key surveys in Mindanao?
So in Mindanao,
what is his net approval satisfaction? Negative what? 70, negative 60, negative 80, right?
Sabi nasa single digit siya sa Mindanao, diba?
Negative approval. Pero yung net niya is what? Negative 70,
we don't do net, so yeah.
But if you do a net, right? It's probably negative 70,
Definitely negative. Definitely in the negative.
So then what's the point of that appeasement?
Exactly. So,
I mean, ganito, obviously we're talking about the politics, but even from an ethical standpoint, it's not like gawa-gawa lang yung mga story about pulong budget. Sure. I mean, about, you know what I'm saying, like mga kababalagan ng mga Duterte era. The numbers are clear. The disguise we're getting this big project starting 2016, 2017. All the numbers, evidence is there. Okay, so the appeasement is the only thing that makes sense to me. But what made him think that in exchange for handing over Digong to get rid of Martin would be I just don't get it. What kind of logic is that?
As a student, we are all a student of Philippine politics here. The president is not only head of government or head of state, he's also head of his political faction.
Sure.
So anong nafe-feel ng kanyang political faction
Yeah.
that is willing to sacrifice the top members of his own faction?
Yeah.
Throw them under
Actually,
the bus.
family.
Diba?
Abandonment, in a sense.
Literally family.
ES ko, tanggalin ko yan. Speaker of the House, tanggalin ko yan. Lahat tatanggalin. But without a corresponding strategy also to signal to the faction that you're safe. Kasi parang, samantalang, on the other hand, in the Duterte camp, kahit anong mangyari,
Protected.
they protect each other. But at the same time, yung narratives nila, it's meant to provide that psychological safety, di ba? Hindi mangyayari yung impeachment.
Oh.
Safe tayo, guys. Makakauwi si Tatay Digo.
Oh.
May psychological na, I think, signaling nga lang yung sa sariling base nila na malakas
Which
tayo,
works.
matatag tayo,
Yeah, which
we
works
can
for them.
weather the storm.
They hold the house together.
So the spirit of solidarity is
There is, right?
Malalim.
is there.
Yung asabiya, di ba?
And which is
As
the most
great-
important,
yeah.
which is the most important power of the president, as always in the case in the Philippine politics, na it's the power to convince, it's the power to influence public conversation. Pero
Signaling power of the president. Yeah, I mean, yung asabiya, right?
And
Yung
rally
nakaldun.
people in a sense.
Yung solid. No, so let's talk about real talk. Is the president now in danger of an implosion of his alliance in the Congress? Because you don't need many, like 1/3 for impeachment. I mean, like to rattle this president in his twilight years. I mean,
Well, I
is
wouldn't.
he alienating enough people, or should he be at least careful about not alienating more than enough
I
people?
think he should be very careful about it, no? Especially if there's talk about doing this anti-political dynasty proposal. You know, those things have to be thought through very, very carefully and has to be calculated at this point.
Just to be clear, this is political analysis. Ethically, we're against dynasty.
Of course,
We're against,
obviously.
baka kasi ma-misunderstand.
Yeah.
This
Yeah,
is a
yeah.
political analysis. Hindi ito ethical, moral debate we're having. Yeah.
No,
what is rather than what ought.
Yeah. We're
Yeah.
just talking about what's gonna happen if X, Y, and Z happen.
And
right?
and there's also naman, I think there's still a way of somehow sort of reconciling it. Like for example, how do you do your reform agenda without necessarily alienating who are still within your political faction?
Right.
No, one thing for sure is that you don't throw your friends under the bus, hindi ba? Or at least if you're going to fire on all 4 cylinders, make sure that walang sinisino. It's not as though tatargetin mo specifically those people who are close to you. Just you want to have a demonstration effect, di ba? So that's one thing that the president, I think, should really seriously think about. Kasi I think the political circle of the president, yung mga lieutenants niya who were there with him from the beginning, nababawasan. Kikita natin yan. And I think, again, this time from a strictly political, pragmatic point of view, it's not going to help him.
Ikaw din, where do you see this for the president in terms of holding his coalition together, avoiding an implosion? He's already going towards the lame duck years, so he's not also in terms of political time, hindi ito yung best political timing. Like, medyo delikado. He's treading very dangerous waters here.
Kung naglalaro ka ng baraha, you have to play your cards very well and it appears na kumbaga sa pusoy.
Like all in. All in! Like, wait.
Medyo gano'n eh. So, yung cards not available sa'yo, I mean, pwede pa namang manalo. Kaya lang, you really have to sway it very well. You have to play it very well. Tingin ko gano'n yung meron itong administration to eh. No? So, meron pa namang time. No? In effect, meron pa namang time to recover, but itong
So
first quarter ito.
what should happen?
Sa akin
Okay.
yung first quarter, number one.
Okay. Let's go into that.
Well, really number one, kailangan talaga magpakulong ng mga ng mga sinasabi natin ng mga big fish. Maliliit na mga isda. We really need the big fish.
Whales.
This is a time for big fishes. Hindi lang isa, kundi ilan talaga dapat ipakulong, no? Kasi contractor pa lang DPWH eh. Tapos ang nangyayari, ang nangyayari, it appears na may mga, hindi ko alam kung may modus vivendi na bang nangyayari o may mga agreement o mga negosasyon.
But that's the suspicion. Bakit may delay? When in fact, some would say, I mean, Justice Carbele, na realistically talagang yung before the end of the year was not realistic. You're looking at February, March maybe. But now, because hindi na meet yung target, everyone is wondering, wait, baka may nangyaring delay dahil may negotiation, may dagdag bawas sa listahan.
Although sasabi nga dyan ng, for example, ng ombudsman or even ng kapatid ng ombudsman, no? Talagang go for gold din naman ang ombudsman kasi it requires for a lot of, legal preparations and make sure that airtight yung case. Pero point ko lang, sa Tagalog na kasabihan, nauuna yung karetera sa kabayo. Inuna mo yung statement na magpapakulong na kami, pero at the same time, di pala ready.
Oo, di
So, di pala ready yung mga dokumento mo na dapat mo kailangan.
Dapat step by the step bago sumakses, di ba?
As I believe, this is the first quarter will be very crucial.
Yeah.
So which means from January hanggang April. Pag walang mga decisive na mga desisyon ang Malacanang, si PBBM, I'm sure is now preparing himself na ma-weaken yung kanyang presidency.
Yung BICAM, have you addressed the issue in terms of transparency and BICAM?
Well, sasabi
Or
nga,
at
first
least
time,
moved
to be
inside.
fair, ito yung mga
Yeah.
nasimulan na yung mga opportunity na dapat yung BICAM ay transparent, may live discussion, at tapos at the same time, may participation. Pero syempre, hindi pa rin ito enough kung tutuusin. Dahil ang sabi nga nila, although nilive yung BICAM, yung ibang namang mga pag-uusap, ibang mga arrangement, ay nangyari outside of the live discussion. So may mga ganyang suspicion, no? Hindi ka sinasabi na yan ang actual na mga nangyari. But the point is, I think there should be an opportunity to further deepen yung ganitong practices sa ating budget process, no? Yung sabi nga ng mga iba't ibang civil society organization, check na yan. Pero bottom line, baka pwede talaga kaming makaupo dyan at makapag-participate, no? And at the same time, yung ordinary mamayan ay pwede makapag-suggest. Kasi ang nangyari, diba, laging galing sa presidente ang proposal, pero is there an opportunity for an ordinary people or civil society organization to identify some possible strength in the budget process and increase budget, for example, more on health? Although sabi nga ngayon, yung PhilHealth natin mas mataas ngayon, taka yung ating education sector uli, no, nakita mo maigi yung 1 trillion plus ang binigay nitong ating kongreso, no? So may mga ganyan ka naman mga significant mga reforms. Unfortunately nga lang, how to sustain it at yung inahan talaga ng mga tao dahil pinakaulan mo yung issue ng corruption. So natatambunan yung iba mong mga magandang ginawa.
Before we go more specifically to the Gen Z, as we discussed also 2028 and at saka the battle for the presidency, medyo mag-rewind tayo ng konti. Like, who is the civil society? What do they really want? Kasi mukhang hindi clear there's the Mendiola Civil Society, those gang guns na hindi naman alam kung anong ginagawa nila nung September na nanggugulo. And then there's of course Bishop Cardinal Ambo and you know, some of the progressive liberal groups na ang position nila is basically hindi kami for resign all or RevGov. Ang gusto lang namin is reforma. But even some of them are now signaling that may limitation din yan, that civil disobedience, if not uncivil disobedience, could be an option kung hindi mangyari itong mga paghuhuli ng mga tunay na big fishes. What is our understanding of the civil society? Kasi we use the term civil society as if it's a monolithic. Hindi eh. Medyo sabog din yung civil society. I mean, or at the very least, it's very variegated. Ang daming debates. I mean, I've just been involved in some of these debates, diba? Some are saying, hindi, RevGov na. Some are saying, hindi, stick to the reform. The others are saying, nagpapa-hostage kayo kay Marcos dahil lang takot kayo, umakyat si Sara, nagpapa-hostage kayo, diba? Others are even calling for Bolshevist revolution, burn down the whole thing. So, I don't think there's the civil society. There are civil societies and organizations and all. What is your read based on the numbers?
Yeah, I think kasi naman parang factionalism yung organizational logic ng Philippine politics.
Right.
That also extends to our civil society organizations. So,
Ganun din.
what you can observe is that
Weak state, strong factions.
Ano pa lang, tingnan mo pa lang halimbawa yung nakaraan na rally laban dun sa flood control scandal, 'di ba? Despite the efforts na magkaroon ng isang lugar, magkahiwalay pa din, 'di ba? You have the baha sa Luneta, tapos meron kang trillion-peso march sa EDSA, 'di ba? Yan yung I think dalawang
Tapos nagbabanatan pa sila, 'di ba? Meron din
ng civil society. One is a more yung kagaya ng sinabi mo, Richard, na hindi sila agree sa resign all.
Yeah.
Gusto nila na binabantayan nila yung Pangulo na kailangan mo manghuli ng big fish, 'di ba? Kailangan mo magkaso diyan, 'di ba? At may binigyan na konting pang oportunidad, no? Bagamat tingin ko maliit na lang din yung kanila pasensya, 'di ba? Nag-promise sila by Feb this year.
Baka
maaari na may malaking rally. Yung isa naman galing sa mga leftist organizations, malinaw na sa kanila na
resign all.
neither Bongbong nor Sara na sila, no? I think yung proseso ng ganun, no, ano naman, expected naman na parehas silang kumakapa. Binabasa nila yung politically
Yeah.
fragmented na landscape, no? At tinitingnan nila ano yung best na way to convince Filipinos. Because I think for all of the factions right now, whether that's the left, progressive, liberal, Duterte, Marcos, the path to winning 2028 is convincing the middle forces, convincing your
Yeah.
independents. And again, that's around half of your voters, right? So ano
So
ngayon?
what do we know? Ano bang hingi nila? Kasi baka naman, at the end of the day, mga ano lang to, silo debate lang yan.
Yeah.
Ano ba talagang gusto ng taong bayan? What is a median voter? Or prospective median voter for 2028? Or what we learned from 2025? Ano yung mga priorities sa kanila?
Well,
Or how to win them over?
ang lumalabas ay, halimbawa, kapag pinaghati-hati mo yung mga voters according to factions and their policy priorities, yung independent voters, ang topmost talaga ay mga economic issues.
Got issues.
So,
Not necessarily good governance, not
mataas na
necessarily
presyo ng
budget.
bilihin,
Yeah.
mataas sa presyo ng bilihin at saka trabaho pa din.
Trabaho,
no? So, your classic economic issues, talagang pang-araw-araw, di ba? If you look at the opposition, syempre, the topmost concern is the flood control, corruption,
Good governance.
and good governance.
Basically, dahan Matuwi 2.0.
Oo, so parang ano naman at home naman talaga yung constituency na to sa agenda na to.
Pero
it's
hindi
not
siya
necessarily-
nagko-connect. Exactly.
But it's not necessarily the agenda for others. If you look at the Dutertes, yung faction na yan, number one pa din, nasa top pa din nila illegal drugs, di ba? At home din sila dyan sa
Yeah.
agenda na yan. So, it's a matter of sinong sasagot dun sa agenda na hinahanap ng middle forces, di ba? And maybe that's, Sen Bam Aquino kind of a...
Bam kind of squared the circle, right?
Diba?
By
Oo,
issuing
oo,
education,
oo.
even
Despite
Kiko,
the pressure from
pagkain.
despite the pressure from his own base, na
to
bakit
talk
hindi
ICC,
masyadong
to talk
impeachment, dapat yung
Hindi masyadong
ICC.
strong.
He stayed parang
Disciplined, yeah.
disciplined and strong, 'di ba? You can also say the same Senbam, but also I think Akbayan, 'di ba? Parang yung kanilang social democratic agenda of expanding social welfare in the
Right.
country, 'di ba? Education, health. Maybe that's speaking to a lot more voters than our traditional reformist agenda.
Which is what we see also like in Thailand with Pita's party
Yeah.
and all. It was the social justice, distributive
Or si
economic
Ma'am Dani.
Or Ma'am Dani,
Definitely
exactly.
people know
Like
yung-
people always look at like the surface, Akbayan, progressive, Ma'am Dani, socialist. But actually they don't, yung nag-connect is yung rent issue,
Yeah,
yung
bus.
childcare,
Bus
yung
service.
service.
Bus service.
So,
Grocery.
Alam ng mga tao na anti-Trump siya, 'di ba? Pero
at
Yun
social
ang highlight.
yeah.
Yun ang
diba,
highlight.
alam din anti
Zionist or anti-
tsaka ayaw niya yung immigration, yung anti-ICE policy din
Right.
siya ni Trump. But the focus is nung nangangampanya siya, nagdo-door-to-door siya,
Rent issue.
'di ba? Ay yung talagang
And that logic applies in the Philippines. So it's going back to civil society. Kasi anyway, kasama tayo sa civil society, just a little dot in that ocean. Pero, so anong dapat messaging natin sa civil society? Obviously, we are for good governance, but we also want to make sure good people end up in positions of power. And you want to make sure you have a narrative that builds the largest coalition, basically. It's coalition politics,
Yeah,
right?
sure. And since I come from public administration, lagi namin sinasabi na hindi sapat na sabihin mong ibagsak. Kailangan sabihin mo
constructive, ano ka?
kung paano mo ibabangon.
Oh.
And I think that is where we should start moving
Positive
our way
agenda.
towards 2028, no? Big Tent Coalition. The numbers are all bibiling, eh. Ano pang gagawin natin, no? So from here on, moving forward, yun na yun na dapat natin pinag-uusapan, no? So santabi na muna yung mga personal political ambitions, mata sa bola, and then think of what does the data reveal, and then build from that kind of data so that we could work on something palpable come 2020.
We'll talk about 20 very shortly.
Naalala ko na di ba what excited the people dun sa Marcos campaign, halimbawa is presyo ng bigas, 20
Yeah.
pesos, di ba?
Diba, ganun.
Are we in the same position? Kaya din ba natin we work towards the same reform? Can we
So
promise?
we make populist
Diba?
promises too?
I think we have to be ambitious in our social policies, di ba?
Tsaka ako naman, Cleve, based on what you said
Yes,
earlier,
Steve.
I think there's still a way of somehow unifying or siguro we could
Harmonizing.
harmonize
Harmonizing.
the top agenda of those who are considered part of the opposition and the independents. I think hindi siya hindi siya diametrically opposed
hindi naman.
to each other. So
It's just a two-level messaging that should be clear to the base.
Yeah.
Kasi minsan the base is a bit protective of their agenda, right? And I mean it in a good way. Like yung good governance agenda is a good agenda. But it's not an inclusive agenda when majority of your voters have something more concrete and immediate in mind.
More palpable. Oh.
So you have to convince your base na, okay,
This is what it
ito yung
leads
agenda
to.
natin, but don't get angry at me if my priority in the mainstream messaging is the issue that actually is important sa ating mga kabayan at legitimate tong issue na to.
And what's
That's two-level messaging.
Yeah, and what's the elevator pitch? Kasi if we say, iboto nyo si Sen Risa, iboto nyo si Mayor Lenny. Bakit? Kasi para siya sa mabuting pamamahala. Maybe, we just need to revise the elevator pitch, di ba? Ano yung unang sasabihin natin? Why they need to vote for the
Radikal ng
candidates that we
pagmamahal.
want.
Angat
Diba?
buhay.
Oo.
So,
Radikal ng pagmamahal.
And then of course, eventually, when they join the rallies, the campaign, when they see the campaign materials, mako-connect nila ngayon. Okay, ang kagustuhan ko palang mababa yung presyo ng mga bilihin, may kinalaman sa
Sa
mabuting
good governance.
pamamahala.
Correct.
Diba? Rather than
radical na pagmamahal.
Baka, I mean, radical
it might
din
be
yan.
that, no? Hindi
Radical na
naman-
reforma.
May ganyang obserbasyon
Might be that.
dahil for example, we try to do some, yung elevator pitch natin medyo highfalutin at hindi ito talaga
Hindi
nagko-connect. Sa third sa may public hindi ito lumalan doon sa mga day-to-day na pangangailangan ng mga tao. That's why, parang feel natin, mayroong alienation in a sense na parang, pang-desente lang itong kandidatong ito, halimbawa, or pang mayaman, paano kami mga takatambay? Ano yung agenda namin bilang mga tambay, anong mga pangangailangan namin na feeling namin itong mga nagsasabi ng good governance ay hindi pala namin maintindihan. At tingin sa amin, okay lang sa amin ang mababang presyo ng bigas at hindi magulo yung aming eskalita. So, I think these are the things that maybe, not actually maybe, but rather be, a turning point para sa civil society organizations, sa academia, na i-confront natin na ito yung mga botante na kailangan talaga nating intindihin, unawain, at sayang yung mga survey na date na impormasyon na nakuha natin kung hindi pala natin ito gagamitin para sa ating mga taong mensahe. Tulad nga, for example, yung nabas nga survey recently nga ng WR, usapin pa rin ng inflation, usapin pa rin ng trabaho, hindi pa natin makonect yung ating mensahe sa kanila. So, how come that we're going to win them over kung meron silang mga pipiliing ibang kandidato come 2028. So I think it's really about time for us at sa mga gustong mag-offer ng alternatibo na intindihin itong mga pangailangan ng mga ordinaryong mga tao at siguraduhin na yung kanilang mga mensahe will definitely cut across, katulad ng mga naging experience nga ng ibang mga progressive candidates, for example, yan nga ito sa New York, si Mandami, etc. Even si AOC, kaya mga nangyari, yung mga gut level issues hindi naman sila nakako ng iligtas namin ang mga immigrants dito sa New York. Wala naman silang sinabing gano'n Simple sabi nila rent, bus service, mahal, yung mga accessibility sa mga groceries kasi ang mahal ng groceries sa New York sa totoo lang. So yung mga ganyang mga bagay. So I think it's really about time to realize
But if that's your position, hindi kaya din tapatan ng kabila yan. So what's your distinguishing factor? That's where you can say, well, the difference is hindi ako magnakaw. Bibigyan kita talaga ng affordability dahil hindi kami nagnanakaw, actually pupunta sa inyo yung pera. Yung kabila magpapromise yan, pero dami rin nanakawin yan. Not to mention papatayin rin kayo, diba? Kasi yun yung maging counter, kung populism lang, magaling din yung kabila. And then you'll bring in the pitch. But hindi magnakaw si Lenny, hindi magnanakaw sila Bam or something like that. Which really brings me to the last part, the important part. Let's talk Turkey, no? So, some people are saying if Lenny is not really interested, I mean, mahabang usapan yan. Even Rafi Tul was been suggesting ayaw niya, he's not interested in this race. Some are saying maybe the surveys now are not helpful in giving chance to others who are not only compelling but could be competitive.
Kakaaway.
Kasi kung ilalagay mo ng 7, 10, 11 man, whatever, it always favors the one who has been very crystal clear and very prepared, which is Sara Duterte. So de facto, she will always win the survey whereby she's the only one who's solidly all in.
She's the sitting vice president.
And the sitting vice president. Oh,
Incumbent
exactly.
advantage.
So she has one foot in the race already. So which brings me to this issue na some are saying, maybe if really Ma'am Lenny is not interested, or just for hypothetical purposes, just to give some starting ignition dun sa mga ibang candidates, whether it's Bam, whether it's Risa, whether it's Torre. Kasi if Lenny doesn't run and she endorses whoever else, or implies that there's someone else that she'll endorse na malapit sa kanya, whether it's Bam or Risa, automatic na you can assume not 100%, but a significant amount of that will automatically shift. So at 2%, 3% for Bam or Risa, it's not really going to be 2 or 3%. It's going to be that plus what Lenny offers, and who knows, there could be another unity, right? But you will not see that. Ang nakikita lang ng tao, ito, 7-man race, Sara is 30, 15, 10, 2, 1, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, ganun. And then it doesn't give you the real potential picture come 2027.
Na 7 in 10, na 70%, actually, hindi nila gusto si Sara.
Exactly.
Hindi masyadong
Exactly.
clear, na 70%.
Which could be actually a 30-30-30 split
Yes.
if it's a three-way. Let's say, just say for the sake of argument, right? Now, again, I'm not taking an issue with surveys because we started with saying don't attack the messenger, right? But I'm just saying, surveys are influential in shaping tactical discussions because as we speak, I don't have to name names. The tycoons and taipans are already meeting different candidates. I've met some of these candidates. I've talked to them. So, kumbaga nagsimula na. Hindi lang in terms of discussion, talaga in terms of funding, organization, people are making moves. You have a secretary like John Vigramulli already saying, I'm open to run. Risa already last year said she's open to be the standard bearer. I don't think Bam or Torre and all are also ruling this out. If anything, maybe they're also actively getting the ball rolling. So, but not Lenny, but not Rafi, right? Like last time I checked. Do you think it makes sense also if people see the other version of surveys? Let's say if Lenny doesn't run, if Rafi doesn't run, then how it could look like, and perhaps that could be. I don't want to use the word helpful because it assumes unhelpful in surveys. So hindi naman but it could open up the discussion in ways it is not. Kasi kumbaga naghihintay na lang lahat ng mga pinks kay Lenny na lang kasi si Lenny ang number 3 di ba? But that leaves the question, if Rafi is gonna run for admin, di ma-split din yan. So medyo na-stuck yung argument because of that shallow reading of just one slice of the survey dimension. You see where I'm coming from, right? Yeah.
Well, kung ano lang din, kung the usefulness lang din, I think, well, dun sa mga tacticians natin, the math will always, math. Kasi, kahit naman long list pa din yung lumalabas, if you can add the numbers na labas lahat ng Sara or labas ng mga Duterte aligned, you can see that there's a viable non-Duterte constituency na pwedeng magpanalo sa isang...
Yung realignment yung hindi nakikita yung realignments.
The other issues naman, now that we're in 2026 and even, papalapit yung 2028, syempre, i-iterate mo ngayon yung questions the way that you've been saying, Richard, na pwedeng tanggalin mo na si VP Lenny. Baka ang gawin, or kaya nandun pa din siya, but those who said Lenny, maybe ask them who their second choice is so that you know saan mag-transfer ang vote. Pwede naman ding set. Actually, we do this, but it's for commission.
No, but that's the thing.
Audiences,
Public discussions are shaped also by the publicly available surveys.
Charge ko na lang kay Richard. Hey, Darian, okay
No, a certain Ranjit Rai on this show actually nag-spill ng beans siya ng private commission. For instance, he said in some of the one they didn't release, actually for instance, Rafi Riza is strong.
Yes.
And Amy Sara is strong, right?
Diba?
Hindi mo makikita yan sa mga surveys yan.
Yes.
But how many people see those private commission surveys? It's good for tacticians, campaign manager. I'm sure the Taipans are also not full. They have their surveys, they're running that.
But for the public.
Pero yun nga there's the intersubjective reality also there that shapes the objective reality. Hindi naman sila separate. Diba? Kasi ngayon, if you make an argument for Risa or you make an reason for Kiko or Bam, immediately sabihin, hindi, si Lenny pa rin number 1, huwag na muna tayo magulo. Hintayin lang natin si Lenny. Which I feel, it might not be very helpful anymore when Sara is so clear that she can be unclear. She said, baka hindi rin ako tatakbo, diba? Like, she's so in that she has that room. When Rafi and Lenny, the other two closest competitions, are almost saying we're not gonna run, right? Like, so ano bang hinintayin natin dito? So I'm just saying, the debate is getting, yun nga hindi nag-move Had we had a real party system, wala na akong pake sa surveys. It goes down to the primaries and then tignan natin from there. Wala tayong primaries. So it all goes down sinong competitive sa surveys.
We will do that. We will do that at WR numero. Pero dapat Team Pinas will organize the open primaries. Of the other candidates, di ba? But we will show them the numbers, di ba? Among different
let's modernize the
candidates.
process. Because the process is kung sino lang mataas sa survey, tumakbo na. That's a very weird way of determining.
I think
like,
diba, Cleve, I think it's workable eh. Maybe perhaps you just have to come up with a more sophisticated instrument, and then perhaps even beyond the survey, come up with some follow-up focus group discussions. That's where you can come up with a more nuanced take, and hindi lang zero-sum game na 7 candidates and then you apportion the percentage, etc., etc. Baka that might be, but again, the challenge is, do we have enough funds to sustain this kind of
kaya
project?
shout out sa mga potential sponsors for good governance. Baka naman you want to fund the other project that we want. Talaga this is for fundraising, crowdfunding. No, it's Gen Z, Gen Zillennial, right?
Yeah.
We don't have exit polls. Well, kasi nga walang pera rin, di ba? Like, so di ba, I had that conference in Oxford. Like, so may Nepal, may India, lahat sila may data, may exit polls, may numbers. Ako lang walang exit poll and gano'n. Parang, what kind of country? Sabi ko, what? No one made the exit poll. It's too expensive. Like, what? Like, you're like a country of like $500 billion GDP.
Yeah.
No one. So actually, it's like anomalous almost. And I'm not blaming you guys. Na when I'm next to those other countries, they all had this detailed data. Kasi it was about, parang if the conference is about the millennial revolution or Gen Z revolution, where's my data? Where's my exit poll?
Yeah.
I have no exit poll. But
Yeah.
the closest we got was that Gen Z study you made, which was not particularly political, but kind of opened up the gate. So from what we have right now, from your initial Gen Z studies, what should we do? What is our heuristic understanding and where should we go?
Yes.
From this Gen Zillennial, which are the biggest block? You win them over, tapos ng laban.
Yes,
That's it.
6 in 10 voters are millennials and Gen Zs, di ba? Actually, yung median age pa lang the median age ng isang Filipino is 25.
25, yes.
So it's very young. So any and all candidate na gustong manalo sa 2028 has to
court that
demographic and win with that demographic. And marami naman na tayong alam about the Gen Z.
Can we reiterate for
preferences,
people?
So halimbawa,
Kasi the one interviewed with Robin, di ba? Ang daming nag-react, di ba? Kasi, syempre, the media will get the highlights. But in fairness to Dr. Robin Garcia from Dublin, he gave the context.
Yes.
But his point was that there's no the Gen Z vote.
Yes.
They're also not monolithic, right?
Yes.
Like, respect this guy. They have different preferences. There's urban-rural divide. There's class. He didn't. And then parang lumabas na parang sinabi niya DDS ng Gen Z. Hindi naman yun. Sabi niya, but you won't be surprised if ever.
Right.
There's some, ganon. So because of that situation, misinformation and overreaction and misreaction, can you remind again people that study that Robin explained?
So I think the most important lesson or the most important insight is that first, marami tayong misconception sa sino ba yung Gen Z, di ba?
Right.
And especially because I think the imagination is that dahil marami mga studies sa Gen Z market research So ang imagination ay urban-based yung Gen Zs, di ba? But there are also Gen Zs outside the urban centers. May rural Gen Zs, di ba? May Gen Zs po sa Mindanao, di ba?
Right.
And when we say halimbawa na ang satisfaction ratings ni Inday Sara sa Mindanao ay 80 to 90%.
And then 60% of your voters are young.
Di ba? Kasama yung Gen Z doon. Imposibleng hindi. Pat lang yun. Imposibleng hindi. So sila din ay Gen Z. So, but I think halimbawa na lang sa media consumption, napaka-fragmented talaga ng Gen Zs, no? So all of our efforts na directed towards traditional media, hindi na din talaga nag-work kasi a lot of them are on TikTok, a lot of them are on other social media platforms, pero hiwa-hiwalay, no? So hindi mo pwedeng sabihin na just be big in one platform and okay ka na, di ba? Halimbawa, yun yung natutunan namin. Secondly, dun sa mga FGDs namin ng Gen Zs, nalaman namin na medyo if millennials kasi kami ni Richard.
Kasi at saka 25 almost borderline sa millennial, di ba?
Yung mga millennials kasi, I think pinanganak tayo sa mundo that go for gold, change is possible, we can do anything.
Obama. I mean, basically Obama. Yes, we can.
Ano talaga di ba?
Yes, we can.
And globalization is positive, internet is positive, di ba? It will change everything.
Liberal globalization.
We've learned in those...
Gen X
We've learned in those studies na hindi ganun yung appreciation ng mga Gen Zs. Mga Gen Zs ay magulo
climate change.
Magulo yung mundo. I just want some sense of stability.
Yeah, COVID-19,
I just
abutan
want some
sila ng
sense
pandemic.
of,
Yeah.
diba? So iba yung mindset eh. Iba yung, so parang I think,
Wait, stability is both law and order stability and economic stability? I mean, because if it's law and order, then panalo mga Duterte agad yan. Like,
medyo lahat medyo
Yeah,
lahat.
it's a
In the
holistic sense of
na-
insecurity.
In the sense na gusto nila na, so medyo may inwardness diba? Na you want to
Insularity,
be
yeah.
financially secured but also the security of the community,
Safety,
diba?
yeah.
The safety, ganyan, no? So may ganong dynamics, no? But at the same time, they feel that marami silang gustong, parang alam nila na lahat ng kinakaharap nila ay hindi personal issues lang. These are social issues. So that they need good governance, for example.
Climate change,
diba?
right, yeah.
Alam nila na they can't do it on their own. There's no such thing as, kaya nga pinagtatawan nila yung mga millennials na puro grind, hard work. They find it funny kasi they know that you cannot win in this economy on your own. There's no such thing as
yung gig economy
na
mindset.
parang pag nag-hard work ka, okay na. No.
Diskarte lang yan. Diskarte
because
lang.
the society is designed against individual success. So then they have this idea of collective success, diba? So these are some of the things
In
na
fairness.
pwedeng maging basis ng isang political agenda that might be
And narrative.
yes, no.
This is very helpful.
Yeah,
This is
pero
very
yung
helpful,
financial security is really the topmost,
That's what I'm saying, yeah.
So, ibig sabihin din, paano natin mapaparamdam anong klaseng political agenda yung makakapagparamdam sa kanila of some sense of that financial, economic stability.
So is it prosperity
Diba?
gospel, abundance,
Maybe.
progressivism?
Diba?
Is that the way?
It doesn't
Parang
go,
papunta...
parang it also doesn't go far with the top agenda of the yung mga
This our
nasa
population,
middle
yeah.
Diba?
Right.
I don't think lumalayo yan masyado eh. Kasi if it's really financial security, ganun din naman yung sinasabi.
Yeah.
Diba?
Aspirational.
Except that it's more, I think more
Moralistic?
more palpable
Yeah.
na mas murang presyo, mas ganun. Diba?
Less moralistic, more concrete.
Yeah.
Right?
Oo.
Ikaw din. So, given all of this understanding we have, although we hope, again, to sponsors, baka you wanna sponsor more studies on this median voter, which tends to be very young, Gen Z-Millennial. If 25 is the median age, then that gives you an idea what kind of demographic you have to study. Ikaw din, what are your priorities? What should be the priorities? I mean, for the Pinas Foundation, but also priorities that we hope the broader middle forces take this year.
Well, similar to what we have discussed earlier, katulad nga binanggit ni Clive dun sa kanilang mga study, from the perspective of academia, no, importante na mas malalim talaga yung pag-unawa natin sa mga taong ito, no.
Right.
Dahil if we will allow them to shape and try to come up with their own thinking of what the society good luck. Wala tayong papel na ginagampanan, especially siguro dahil sa age namin, mga Gen X.
Yeah.
Gen X kami. So,
the greatest
Generation.
meron pas kaming, I mean, we still have what we call yung international solidarity.
Yeah.
Hindi ko alam kung very present ito sa Gen Z at sa millennials, what we call
The
solidarity.
startup tayo, parang sariling sikap.
Medyo dahil nga ang nangyari, very competing dahil ang compelling for Gen Z people, I don't know, I'm not a sociologist, but if you look at, for example, their interest, no, work, rest, and play, na very individualistic mas lalo na hayot. So nawawala na yung idea ng siguro yung panahon namin nila Dean Ed na tambay kami sa labas, nakikipaglaro kami sa mga kapitbahay namin, na kapag may nadapa, tutulungan mo Ito hindi parang okay, pag nadapa, just brush them off or rather parang sasabi
Sounds like a Tito talk. Like,
but the point,
wala na silang ganyan katulad.
but the point is, ang point lang natin dito is that
Gen Z yung
again, if we try to come up with an opportunity to understand our
Solidarity.
voters, you have to strengthen the idea of solidarity.
You have to understand them before you build solidarity with them,
Isa ba
right?
yun? Kaya that's why
Tama.
it's better na, sana meron tayo makuwang matutulong sa atin para
Exactly.
mag-conduct pa ng mas massive. And
That's why we
very
have
deep
this foundation we made. Maybe you want to talk about why do we even have this foundation? What was the idea of us coming
Well,
together?
the idea of TEAM PINAS naman,
Well.
it's a coalition of academics, advocates, and community
Baka
that,
naman.
we come together for the belief na, number one, we're really for promoting accountability, ending the impunity, and strengthening our democratic institutions. We don't believe na dapat isang tao lang magsasalba sa atin. Hindi. It should be a collective effort strong democratic institutions, whoever sits there, importante, clear ang mga agenda sa mga tao. So yun ang gusto namin i-remind. Ito ang gusto natin i-remind ulit sa mga tao. Let's bring back that idea. No? O to some extent, medyo Gen X dahil nga, again, the idea of solidarity, the idea of strengthening community, the idea of democratic institutions.
Yeah.
So, yun yung na-create yung Team Pinas Foundation. That's why, kinumbinsi namin, kaming mga tito ay nangumbinsi sa mga Gen Zenials na hopefully, tumaya kayo dito. That, 60% kayo eh. You're not just a number. You are basically the one who will shape the future. Kami nila Dean Ed, medyo nasa period na kami na pwede kaming hopefully nasa retirement na pa konti-konti, unti-unti, no? Pero we still have this heart for,
Thanks po.
for the
Ano ba yung sinabi niya? Bahala na kayo dyan. Hindi kayo the bad president. Good luck
Ang gusto ko sabihin, kasalanan nyo to eh.
Gusto ko sana sabihin.
Binana lang namin to eh.
Gusto ko sana sabihin, can you just
Ayan
please
na.
speak for yourself?
Ayan na. I could see the disowned. Hindi ko siya kilala. Ibang Gen X, di ba may upper Gen X?
Again,
Gen X
hindi
ngayon?
rin homogeneous.
Ayan, okay na.
May disclaimer lang doon.
May disclaimer on that. Yes.
Just one point.
Din it.
I'll just wear my
Please.
hat on as academic. No? I think it's very critical that we really come up with more sophisticated models of understanding the landscape.
Yeah.
Kasi, of course, the survey firms, you can't really fault them dahil yun ang talagang for public consumption, but I think, sabi naman ni Cleve, it's workable, except that it's going to require some resources. So, to me, that is equally important, not only from an academic point of view, kasi you get a better sense of what's really happening on the ground, but also helping us shape the narrative for the future. Kasi nga, pagka isang dimension lang yung nakikita natin, reality is never like that. We know that, no? So that's one thing that I'd like sana to highlight, both as an academic and as an advocate.
Yeah, and as a vlogger, I would also emphasize importante we have resources. A lot of resources to fund more interesting stuff. No, we really need it.
Yes.
Blind spot. I mean, like, haka-haka lang yun eh. Kwentong barbera, ang daming kwento. Like, you cannot say this is how the Gen Z votes based on some candidate who got 5 million, 3 million votes. I think Gen Z mo, ilan, tens of millions po. Like, there's so much, like, I would say, rhetorical posturing and heuristic at best, kind of the diagnostics na hindi based talaga sa hard data, and that's why we are desperate for hard data, and we're not desperate, but we will welcome more support and more collaboration for this. Yeah.
And then pag pinagsama-sama natin yung mga studies, we see that may distinct dun sa generation, but at the same time may mga concerns sila na may continuities with the others. But halimbawa na lang mga classic na distinction would be for the Gen Zs that they're the generation compared to the previous millennials, Gen X and others. They have less alcohol.
Yeah, they're more healthy
they
living.
drink the least as a generation na pagka tinignan mo nung time na to, yung mga ibang previous generation, they have the least sex.
Friendship
also,
matters. Platonic.
Least use of illegal drugs, maybe that's good, diba?
That's good.
But and then less smoking. So it's a different generation. Baka may kinalaman din dun sa sinasabi ni Dean Gary na kasi before yung mga previous generations, you hang out together,
peer pressure,
tambayan kayo, diba? So ito iba. But that means mag-iiba din yung forma ng politika. Paano sila liligawan? Politics is very unserious, di ba? Politics is parang a spectacle for Gen Z.
Kasi, mimetic politics.
Yeah, kasi social media. Oo, di ba? So,
but it's a coping mechanism. It's dark humor, really. I mean, look at it. I mean, if if Maduro's jumpsuit during
exactly.
Nike commercial, that just tell you we're in meme era na talaga. But having said that, you work with what's there.
Yeah.
Yun ang mensahe natin. At the end of the day, we don't work based on imagination or based on aspiration. You work on what is there and then you take it to where it wants to go. Diba? And that's why I appreciate really this conversation. Thank you very much, Cleve. Thank you very much, Dean Ed and Dean Gary, for that real talk. We started the year with real talk. So hopefully, more support para we can do more studies and more analysis. And sana tuloy-tuloy itong FYI series natin as we head into what seems like even more turbulent year than 2025. Salamat.